It was just another ordinary day in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of day where nothing particularly exciting ever seemed to happen. The streets were lined with trees that whispered in the breeze, children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, and a golden light bathed the world in the late afternoon sun. It was the kind of day that felt predictable, unchanging. But for one teenage girl, this day would mark the beginning of something extraordinary, something she couldn't have possibly seen coming. She was 16, at that age where the world still felt full of questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? She wasn't popular, nor was she particularly shy. Just a regular teenager navigating the ups and downs of life. Her favorite escape was walking. She'd stroll through the neighborhood for hours, headphones in, letting her mind wander. It was during one of these walks that her life took an unexpected turn. There he was, a lonely old man, sitting on a weathered park bench beneath the shade of a sprawling oak tree. His appearance was unassuming. A wool cap pulled low, hands resting on a wooden cane, his face marked with the lines of a life long lived. He was always there, at the same time, in the same spot, staring at the same distant horizon as though searching for something, or someone, that was no longer there. At first, she passed him without much thought, like everyone else did. But there was something about him that caught her attention. Was it the sadness in his eyes? Or perhaps the way he seemed so alone, as if the world had forgotten him? Whatever it was, that day, something inside her told her to stop. She didn't know it then, but that small, seemingly insignificant decision would change everything. She said hello. It was simple, casual, the kind of greeting you might offer a stranger without much thought. And yet, the old man's reaction was anything but ordinary. His head lifted slightly, and for the first time in what felt like years, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It wasn't just a greeting to him. It was an invitation, an opening. What followed was a story that could have been pulled straight from the pages of a novel. A bond between two unlikely friends, one at the very beginning of life's journey, the other nearing its end. Their friendship grew slowly, with each passing day bringing new layers of trust and understanding. But hidden beneath the surface of their conversations was a secret so incredible, so unimaginable, that it would one day shake her world to its very core. You see, Mr. Harris, the lonely old man on the park bench, wasn't who he appeared to be. Beneath his humble demeanor and modest lifestyle lay a secret he had kept hidden for decades. He wasn't just an ordinary retiree living out his final years in quiet solitude. No, Mr. Harris was a multimillionaire. A man whose fortune, an astonishing $50 million, remained locked away, unseen by the world. And even more shocking? He was about to change her life forever. But how did it all unfold? How does a chance encounter between a teenager and a reclusive old man turn into one of the most life-altering discoveries imaginable? What led him to reveal his secret? And why, of all people, did he choose her to share it with? As we unravel this incredible story, we'll uncover the moments of kindness, connection, and serendipity that led to this extraordinary revelation. So, let me ask you, what would you do if you discovered your best friend was hiding a life-changing secret? How would you react if the person you thought you knew turned out to be someone completely different? Would it change how you saw them, or yourself? Stick with us, as we take you through every twist and turn of this unforgettable tale. By the end of it, you might find yourself questioning the very nature of human connection, the value of kindness, and the unexpected ways our actions can ripple through someone's life. She was 16, at that pivotal age where everything feels like it's changing, yet nothing seems to make sense. Her name was Emily, a high school junior with a thoughtful gaze and a quiet demeanor. She wasn't one to stand out in a crowd. To most of her classmates, she was just the girl in the back row, the one who kept to herself and seemed content with the company of her thoughts. But beneath that reserved exterior was a young girl navigating struggles that no one truly understood. Emily's life wasn't easy, though she never made it obvious. She came from a small family, just her mom, and her younger brother. Her dad had left when she was 10, and though she barely talked about it, his absence left a scar she carried silently. Her mom worked 2 jobs to keep the household afloat, often leaving Emily to care for her brother. She didn't mind the responsibility, but it often left her feeling like the weight of the world rested on her young shoulders. At school, Emily wasn't exactly popular, but she wasn't an outcast either. She existed somewhere in between, floating through the hallways like a shadow. She had friends, but they were more like acquaintances, people she could chat with during lunch or in class, but not the kind of friends she could truly confide in. And that's what Emily longed for more than anything. A genuine connection. Someone who would see her for who she was, who would listen, and who wouldn't judge her for the feelings she sometimes couldn't put into words. What made Emily stand out, though, was her kind heart. Even with her own struggles, she always found a way to care for others. She had this quiet compassion about her, a willingness to help even when no one asked. Whether it was lending her notes to a classmate who had missed school or volunteering to babysit for her neighbors, Emily always found ways to give. Perhaps it was her way of filling the void in her own life, or maybe it was simply who she was. Someone who believed that small acts of kindness could make a difference. But despite her outward kindness, Emily often felt lonely. Her family life was chaotic, her friendships felt shallow, and there were moments when she wondered if anyone truly saw her. That's why she cherished her long walks after school. They were her escape, a chance to step away from the noise, the responsibilities, and the expectations. She'd plug in her headphones, turn on her favorite playlist, and let the world fade away as she wandered through the familiar streets of her neighborhood. It was during one of these walks that Emily's path crossed with Mr. Harris. She had seen him before. An elderly man sitting alone on a park bench, his figure almost blending into the background. At first, she thought nothing of him. He was just another person in the scenery of her everyday life. But one day, something about him caught her attention. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, as if the world around him didn't exist. Or maybe it was the look in his eyes, a deep, faraway gaze that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. Emily couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to him. She knew what loneliness looked like, and in him, she saw a reflection of her own. On a whim, she decided to say hello. It was a small act, something most people wouldn't think twice about. But for Emily, it was a step outside her comfort zone, a moment of bravery born out of curiosity and empathy. She didn't expect much of a response, maybe a polite nod or a murmured reply. But to her surprise, the old man looked up, his face softening ever so slightly. He greeted her back, and in that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Over time, Emily learned more about Mr. Harris. He was a man of few words, but he had a way of speaking that made her want to listen. He told her about the places he had lived, the people he had loved, and the years that had passed him by. In return, she shared pieces of her own life, her struggles, her dreams, and the things she kept hidden from everyone else. What made their connection possible was Emily's willingness to see beyond the surface. Where others saw an old man on a bench, she saw a story waiting to be told. Where others might have walked by without a second thought, she chose to stop. It wasn't because she had to, it was because she wanted to. For Emily, those moments with Mr. Harris became the highlight of her days. In him, she found a kind of companionship she hadn't realized she was missing. And for Mr. Harris, Emily was more than just a curious teenager. She was a reminder of the kindness that still existed in the world. Together, they formed a bond that was as unexpected as it was meaningful, setting the stage for a story that neither of them could have anticipated. It all started one unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. Emily was walking home from school, as she often did, her backpack slung over her shoulder, the rhythm of her footsteps accompanied by the low hum of her favorite playlist. The world felt distant to her, like she was merely a spectator in her own life, watching the days pass by. But that day, as she turned the corner near the park, something was different. Something caught her eye. There, on the same weathered bench where she had occasionally seen him sitting, was the old man. She'd noticed him before, of course. He was a regular presence in the park, always alone, always watching the world through eyes that seemed a little too wise, a little too sad. She didn't know his name, and she didn't know much else about him, except that he had an air of solitude that she couldn't ignore. There was something about him that tugged at her, something that made her wonder about the story behind his quiet demeanor. Today, though, as she passed by, she felt a strange pull, as if the universe had nudged her in his direction. She slowed her pace, hesitant at first. Her gut told her to keep walking, to stick to her routine. After all, she was just a teenager. Why would an old man want to talk to her? What could they possibly have in common? But there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that this was her chance to reach out, to break the silence between them, to make some kind of connection. With a deep breath, she approached him. The old man didn't look up as she neared, his hands resting on his cane, his eyes fixed on the ground in front of him. She stopped a few feet away, unsure of how to begin. Her throat tightened. This was the kind of thing people didn't do, right? Talk to strangers, especially not someone so much older, so much more experienced in the ways of the world. But then, before she could second-guess herself, she spoke. "Hi, I'm Emily," she said, her voice tentative but kind. "Are you okay? You look like you're deep in thought." The old man's eyes flicked up slowly, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before shifting away, as if he hadn't expected anyone to notice him at all. For a second, he said nothing. The silence between them stretched thin, making Emily feel awkward. She was about to turn and walk away when he spoke, his voice gruff and unexpected. "I'm fine, child. Just thinking," he said quietly, his words tinged with a strange sadness. Emily wasn't sure why, but she stayed. She shifted from one foot to the other, her curiosity getting the better of her. Something in his voice, in his tired eyes, told her there was more beneath the surface. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't want to be alone anymore. "Thinking about what?" she asked gently. The old man's gaze met hers again, and this time, there was something more. A flicker of recognition, of surprise. He seemed to study her for a moment, as if debating whether or not to respond. Finally, he sighed, the sound heavy with years of unspoken words. "Things that I can't change," he murmured. There was something in his words that struck a chord with Emily, something she could relate to. She hadn't realized it, but she had been holding her breath as she waited for him to speak. She smiled softly, a gesture of understanding. "Well, sometimes talking about things helps," she said, her voice carrying the gentle weight of a truth she had learned from her own experiences. "It doesn't fix anything, but it does make it a little easier to bear." For a moment, the old man looked at her in silence, as if weighing her words. Then, to her surprise, he shifted on the bench, making room for her. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Emily hesitated for a split second before sitting down beside him, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure why, but she felt a connection to him, a shared understanding of loneliness, of carrying burdens in silence. Their conversations began as small, tentative exchanges. The old man, who had been so closed off at first, started to open up, slowly, piece by piece. He spoke in riddles sometimes, his words veiled in mystery, but Emily found herself intrigued by the layers of his past that he hinted at. She learned that he had once been a successful businessman, traveling the world, living a life full of adventure. But somewhere along the way, he had lost everything that had mattered to him. His wife, his friends, and eventually, his purpose. "I was a fool," he confessed one afternoon, after several weeks of silent meetings in the park, chasing success, thinking that it would bring me happiness. But when you reach the top, you realize there's no one left to share it with. Emily listened quietly, her heart heavy for the man sitting beside her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew what it felt like to yearn for something more, to crave human connection. She'd heard pieces of his story, but there was still so much left unsaid. So many things he hadn't shared, so many memories he had tucked away in the corners of his mind. The days passed, and their friendship grew in small, quiet ways. They shared stories, exchanged little bits of advice, and slowly, Emily became a constant in his life. Each time she returned to the park, he was there, waiting for her with the same patient, thoughtful expression. And with every visit, she saw something shift in him, a softening of his demeanor, a glimmer of hope that hadn't been there before. He didn't have much, but he had something that he could offer her. His wisdom, his life experiences, and most unexpectedly, his trust. But as much as Emily wanted to understand him, there was still one thing she didn't know. One question she couldn't bring herself to ask. Why did he sit alone, day after day, on that same bench, with no one around him? What was the real reason behind his solitude? It wasn't until much later, long after they had established a deep friendship, that Emily would learn the truth. The old man, who had once seemed so mysterious, so unknowable, was hiding something far more significant than his past. Something that, once revealed, would change everything for Emily and for their friendship. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's friendship with the old man deepened. What had started as small talk on a park bench transformed into regular, heartfelt conversations. They shared more than just words. There was an unspoken bond between them, one that Emily didn't quite understand but felt grateful for. Yet, beneath the warmth of their growing connection, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he let on. It wasn't any one thing that made her suspicious. At first, it was just little details. The way he seemed to know so much about the world, far beyond what a retired man might learn from books or television. The way he carried himself, not like someone who had been worn down by life, but like someone who had lived it fully, someone who had tasted success in a way few could imagine. And then there were the cryptic comments, sprinkled into their conversations like breadcrumbs leading to a mystery. One afternoon, as they sat under the same sprawling oak tree, the old man had gazed into the distance and muttered, almost to himself, "It's strange, isn't it? How all the money in the world can't buy back time." Emily had nodded, thinking it was just another one of his reflective musings, but something about the way he said it lingered in her mind. Another time, he had mentioned a place, a grand estate on the edge of town, hidden behind tall gates and surrounded by thick trees. "Used to know the man who lived there," he had said casually, his tone betraying a hint of nostalgia. "Haven't been back in years. Too many memories." Emily hadn't thought much of it then, but later, she couldn't help but wonder. How did he know someone who owned a house like that? And why did he seem so familiar with it? The clues were small, scattered, and easy to dismiss on their own. But together, they painted a picture that didn't quite add up. Emily began to notice other things, too. Like the expensive watch he always wore, despite his otherwise modest appearance. Or the way he seemed to know people in the park. People who greeted him with a subtle nod, as if they recognized him but were too respectful to intrude. One day, as they were talking, Emily couldn't hold back her curiosity any longer. "You've lived such an interesting life," she said carefully, trying to keep her tone casual. "You must have some amazing stories." The old man chuckled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Amazing? I don't know about that," he said. "But I've had my share of experiences." "You never talk about your family," she ventured, watching his expression closely. "Do you have anyone? Kids? Grandkids?" For a moment, his face clouded over, and he looked away. "No," he said simply. "Not anymore." His voice was quiet, almost too quiet to hear. And just like that, the conversation shifted. Emily could tell he didn't want to talk about it, and she didn't push him. But her curiosity burned brighter than ever. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, on a rainy afternoon when Emily decided to stop by his house. It was the first time she had seen where he lived, a small, unassuming home on the outskirts of town. She hadn't planned to visit, but when the rain started pouring and she remembered he often sat in the park regardless of the weather, she worried about him. When she knocked on the door, there was no answer at first. She hesitated, wondering if she should leave, but then she noticed the door was slightly ajar. "Hello?" she called out, stepping inside cautiously. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of classical music playing from an old record player in the corner. It was a simple home, cozy, but nothing extravagant. Yet, as Emily looked around, she began to notice things that didn't fit. A painting on the wall that looked suspiciously like an original. A bookshelf filled with rare, leather-bound books. And then, on a desk in the corner, a stack of papers that caught her eye. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to them, but something about the way they were arranged, almost as if they had been left there deliberately, made her pause. She stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The top sheet was a letter, dated years ago, addressed to a name she didn't recognize. But the name at the bottom of the page was unmistakable. It was his. Beneath the letter were documents, financial records, property deeds, and accounts with numbers so large they made her head spin. Emily's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just a comfortable retirement fund. This was wealth, extraordinary, unimaginable wealth. Before she could process what she was seeing, she heard the soft creak of a floorboard behind her. She turned sharply, her heart leaping into her throat. The old man stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said finally, his voice calm but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. Disappointment? Resignation? "I'm sorry," Emily stammered, stepping away from the desk. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," he interrupted gently, raising a hand. "I suppose it was bound to happen sooner or later." He walked over to the desk, his movements slow and deliberate, and picked up the papers. For a moment, he studied them in silence. Then he turned to Emily, his eyes meeting hers. "There's something you should know," he said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Emily felt her knees weaken as she sat down on the nearest chair. The old man took a deep breath, his gaze distant. "I wasn't always this," he said, gesturing to himself. "Once, I had everything. Money, power, influence. But none of it mattered in the end. Not when I lost the people I cared about most." His voice faltered, and Emily could see the pain in his eyes. He told her about his past, a life of ambition and success, but also one of mistakes and regrets. He had built an empire, only to watch it crumble when he realized he had no one to share it with. "I've been holding on to this," he said, gesturing to the documents, "because I didn't know what else to do. But maybe it's time to let go." Emily listened in stunned silence as the old man revealed the full extent of his story. The wealth, the secrets, the guilt that had kept him isolated for so long. It was a moment she would never forget. A moment that changed everything she thought she knew about him and about herself. The room was silent, save for the faint crackle of the fireplace. The teenager sat on the edge of her seat, her eyes locked on the old man, waiting for him to speak. He leaned back in his chair, his weathered hands resting on a stack of documents. After a long pause, he began. "It's time you knew the truth," he said softly, his voice carrying a mix of weariness and resolve. "What I'm about to tell you, I've never shared with anyone before." The old man's story unfolded, piece by piece. Decades ago, he had been a brilliant entrepreneur, building a modest business into a multimillion-dollar empire. His success had brought him wealth beyond his imagination, but it came at a cost. As he poured his life into his work, he neglected his family. By the time he realized what he'd lost, it was too late. His wife had passed away, and his estranged children wanted nothing to do with him. Consumed by regret, he decided to leave it all behind. He sold his companies, liquidated his assets, and moved to this quiet neighborhood under an assumed name. "I thought if I distanced myself from the world, I could find some peace," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. The teenager listened, captivated by the weight of his confession. "But why did you hide it all?" she asked hesitantly. "I didn't want my money to define me," he replied. "For so long, people only saw the wealth, not the man behind it. I wanted to live a life where kindness mattered more than bank accounts." He went on to explain that the $50 million wasn't just sitting idly in a bank. Over the years, he had quietly invested it into charitable projects, building schools in underserved communities, funding medical research, and supporting local businesses. But there was still a significant sum left, untouched, waiting for the right purpose. "And now," he said, turning to the teenager, "I believe you might be the one to help me figure out what to do with it." The teenager's heart raced. "Me?" she asked, stunned. "Yes, you," the old man said with a faint smile. "You've shown me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope. Your kindness, your curiosity. They reminded me that there's still good in this world, and I want to make sure that good continues after I'm gone." The revelation was overwhelming. The teenager felt a mix of awe, responsibility, and a profound sense of connection to this man who had trusted her with his deepest secret. "I don't even know where to begin," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't have to decide right now," he assured her. "All I ask is that you promise to use it wisely, for something meaningful." The moment was raw and deeply emotional. The teenager realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, redemption, and the power of trust. For the old man, sharing his secret was a way to reconcile with his past and ensure his fortune would bring light to others. For the teenager, it was the start of a journey she never could have imagined. Their bond, forged through trust and compassion, had become something extraordinary. The $50 million secret was no longer just a hidden fortune. It was a bridge between two lives, a chance for redemption, and an opportunity to make a difference in the world. The teenager's life was never the same after that day. The revelation of the old man's $50 million secret had opened a door to possibilities she had never imagined. But it wasn't just the money that changed her. It was the experience, the bond they shared, and the lessons she learned along the way. At first, she struggled to process the weight of the responsibility. The old man had entrusted her with something monumental, not just financially, but emotionally. He didn't simply hand her the money. He shared his vision, his regrets, and his hopes for what could be done with it. Together, they spent hours talking about the causes he cared about and how she could continue his legacy. The teenager found herself growing in ways she never thought possible. She began to see the world through his eyes, understanding the importance of giving, of leaving a positive mark. The old man became more than a friend. He became a mentor, someone who believed in her when she wasn't sure she could rise to the occasion. As weeks turned into months, the old man's health began to decline. The teenager stayed by his side, helping him with daily tasks and keeping him company. Despite his frailty, he always spoke with a sense of peace. "I've lived my life," he would say. "Now it's your turn to live yours, and to make it count." When the day came that he passed away, the teenager was heartbroken, but she found solace in the memories they had shared and the trust he had placed in her. In his will, he left her a portion of the fortune, not to spend on herself, but to manage as a steward of his vision. The rest was allocated to charitable causes they had discussed together, ensuring that his wealth would continue to make a difference long after he was gone. The teenager took the responsibility seriously. She used the money to fund scholarships, support struggling families, and build community centers. She also kept a portion for herself, not to live lavishly, but to pursue her dreams of higher education and to ensure she could continue the cycle of kindness she had learned from the old man. Reflecting on their relationship, she realized it wasn't the money that had truly changed her. It was the connection, the way they had helped each other grow and heal. The old man had given her more than a fortune. He had shown her the power of compassion, trust, and believing in others. The story became a reminder for everyone who heard it. Sometimes, a small act of kindness can lead to rewards far greater than we could ever imagine. It's not about the money. It's about the relationships we build, the lessons we learn, and the legacy we leave behind. As the teenager stood at the old man's grave one last time, she whispered a promise, "I'll make you proud." And with that, she walked away, not just with a fortune, but with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to honor the man who had forever changed her life. Friendship and kindness have a way of transforming lives in the most unexpected ways. This story of a teenager and an old man is a testament to how a single act of reaching out can create a bond that leaves an everlasting impact. It wasn't just about uncovering a $50 million secret. It was about two souls finding comfort, growth, and purpose in each other. The teenager's kindness gave the old man a reason to believe in humanity again. In return, he left her with a legacy far greater than wealth, a purpose to make a difference in the world. Their story reminds us that behind every person is a story waiting to be heard, a life waiting to be touched. What about you? Who in your life might be waiting for a connection, a kind word, or a helping hand? Perhaps the next story like this is just waiting to unfold. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this inspires you to embrace kindness in your own life. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more inspiring stories just like this one. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes The smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. Stay kind, stay connected, and we'll see you in the next story.